At the family reunion in front of 52 people, my mom Patricia raised her glass, pointed at my sister Sophia and said, "This is the daughter who's always loved us. The other one, she's never lifted a finger." I had covered their mortgage and paid their bills for 15 years. As a financial analyst with multiple certifications, I had systematically supported them with over $183,000. I smiled, gathered my composure, and left. The next morning, I had 38 missed calls. The reunion was already in full swing when I walked into the mountain lodge. Red checkered tablecloths covered every surface, buffet trays steaming with comfort food, toddlers weaving between chairs, clutching juice boxes like lifelines. Someone had dragged a vintage speaker onto the wraparound porch and was blasting Fleetwood Mac loud enough to rattle the floor-to-ceiling windows. The whole scene felt messy, loud, and achingly familiar. But for the first time in what felt like years, I actually allowed myself to hope. Cousins smiled genuinely when I said hello, their faces lighting up with recognition. Someone immediately offered me sangria in a mason jar, the ice clinking against the glass. I spotted my dad Richard near the far table, his shoulders relaxed, laughing like he'd just remembered what joy felt like. The sound sent warmth through my chest, and I thought to myself, maybe this will be different. Maybe it won't be perfect. But at least no one will end up crying in the parking lot this year. The lodge itself was stunning, all exposed beams and panoramic views of the valley below. I had booked this place months ago, coordinating with the event planner, handling the deposit, managing the catering details. Every family member assumed someone else had organized it. That was fine by me. I preferred working behind the scenes, ensuring everything ran smoothly without needing credit. My sister Sophia was gliding around the room in a flowing white sundress, barefoot on the polished wood floors, practically glowing like she belonged in a commercial for organic lemonade. She carried a carefully wrapped frame in her hands, tissue paper delicately tied with silk ribbon. I didn't think much of it at first. I had brought my own gift, after all, a reservation at Le Bernardin, the upscale French restaurant our parents had been talking about visiting for 3 years, but never actually committed to. I had quietly tucked the reservation confirmation under their dinner plates before they sat down, along with a handwritten note explaining that transportation and wine pairings were included. That was how I'd envisioned the evening unfolding: quiet gestures, shared stories over good food, a few slightly awkward but genuine embraces, nothing theatrical. But then Sophia stood up with obvious intent. Someone materialized with a microphone, as if they'd been waiting for this moment all evening. The coincidence struck me as suspicious, but I pushed the thought away. She gave this perfectly practiced little laugh, the kind that sounds spontaneous but has clearly been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Oh gosh, I didn't plan to say anything formal," she announced, which immediately told me she'd been planning this speech for days, possibly weeks. The room's attention shifted to her like iron filings to a magnet. "Sorry to interrupt everyone's wonderful conversations," she continued, clapping her hands twice like a kindergarten teacher calling her class to attention. "But I just have a little something special for our absolutely amazing parents." She pivoted with theatrical grace, held out the frame with both hands, and presented it to Patricia like she was bestowing a royal honor. It was a photo collage, professionally mounted and matted. Every image showed the 3 of them together, vacation selfies from trips I had funded, birthday celebrations where I had worked late to pay for the decorations, random porch moments that somehow never included me, not even accidentally lurking in the background. The composition was deliberate, artful, and completely erasure of my existence in their family narrative. Patricia's eyes widened as she studied the collage, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like relief. She stood up slowly, ceremoniously, raised her wineglass high enough for everyone to see, and declared with perfect clarity, "This is the daughter who's always loved us." The room erupted in gentle applause and murmured appreciation. Someone even let out a small, delighted gasp. Then Patricia's voice grew stronger, more confident, as if she'd found her truth. "The other one? She's never lifted a finger." The applause stopped abruptly. The room fell into the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. Someone coughed nervously. A fork clattered against a plate. I could feel the collective discomfort radiating from 52 people who suddenly didn't know where to look. I didn't look around to gauge reactions, but I could sense everything: the confusion rippling through the crowd, the subtle shift in energy, the desperate need everyone felt to pretend those words hadn't just been spoken. I didn't say anything in response. I didn't cry, didn't challenge her, didn't ask what the hell she thought I'd been doing for the past decade and a half of her financial crises. I simply picked up my purse, walked calmly to the door, and left. No drama, no theatrical exit, no raised voice or slammed door, just this strange, crystalline clarity that if I stayed another second, I would never be able to forget the sound of 52 people choosing not to defend me. I drove home through the mountain darkness in complete silence. No music, just the hypnotic blur of highway lights and the weight of 15 years of unacknowledged sacrifice settling into my bones. During that 2-hour drive, my mind began cataloguing everything with the precision of a financial audit. How many emergency wire transfers had I sent at midnight when their furnace died? How many utility bills had I quietly absorbed so they could manage their rough patches? How many of my own birthday celebrations had I sacrificed, working overtime to ensure they could keep their house when Richard's pride prevented him from asking for help directly? I had covered their mortgage payments for 15 years. I had paid their bills, their medical expenses, their property taxes. I had funded family vacations, car repairs, and Sophia's endless series of career transitions. And tonight, in front of 52 witnesses, I had been systematically erased from their family story. But fine, I had smiled, maintained my dignity, and left. 15 hours later, my phone showed 38 missed calls. The notifications started rolling in around 6:17 a.m., which struck me as boldly presumptuous considering no one had bothered to check where I'd gone when I walked out the night before. The first batch came from Patricia, her name appearing again and again on my screen. Then several from Richard. But my personal favourite detail, 14 calls from Sophia. 14! The same woman who hadn't contacted me in months unless she needed someone to explain tax deductions, had suddenly transformed into a desperate telemarketer. I made my morning coffee with deliberate calm, perched on the edge of my granite kitchen counter in my penthouse, and simply stared at my phone screen as it continued lighting up like a Christmas tree. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, I answered, not because I felt generous, but because I wanted to hear how they'd attempt to navigate this conversation. "Oh, thank God you picked up," Sophia's voice cracked through the speaker. "We didn't know where you went. We were worried something terrible had happened." I took a slow sip of coffee. "I'm perfectly fine." "Well, we have a problem. We can't get on the boat." Her tone shifted to irritation. "What boat?" I asked, though I already knew. "The group tour, the scenic lake cruise everyone was supposed to take this morning. We showed up at the dock and they said it was cancelled. Something about the credit card being declined." She huffed with obvious frustration. "Ah," I set down my mug. "That would be because the card on file was mine, and I cancelled it last night." The silence stretched long enough that I could practically hear her blinking in confusion. "But why would you do that?" "Well, Sophia, Patricia stood up in front of 52 people and announced that I'd never lifted a finger for this family," I said with the same tone I'd used to explain market volatility to a client. So I figured, why not make her words true? Another silence, heavier this time. "Okay, but what about the whole trip? People are asking questions." "Yes, I cancelled everything. The lodge booking, the catering, the transportation. It was all in my name, all on my credit." I paused, letting that sink in. "They don't even have a way back to the city." "Well, then I guess you'll need to figure out how to pay for everyone's tickets home." My voice remained steady, professional. "Eleanor, I don't have that kind of money." "You know I don't." "That's perfectly fine," I replied. "You're the daughter who's always loved them. I'm sure they'll understand your financial limitations." And I hung up. I didn't feel proud in any traditional sense. There was no surge of vindication, no triumphant feeling swelling in my chest. Instead, I felt still, centered, like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I'd been hauling for 15 years. All those quiet wire transfers, mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery allowances, medical expenses that somehow became urgent every few months. The endless stream of financial support that I'd provided without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. Silence felt like the most honest response I could give. They had no real comprehension of how much I'd covered over the years. I'd never thrown it in their faces, never said, "Just so you know, this family vacation you're all enjoying, I funded it." I hadn't needed applause or public recognition. I'd simply wanted to be treated like I mattered as much as a photo collage from Sophia. The terrible truth, I wasn't even surprised. That moment when Patricia lifted her glass and declared, "This is the daughter who's always loved us," hadn't materialized from thin air. It was the culmination of years of this exact pattern, This precise dynamic that had been building like pressure in a fault line. Sophia had always been the star, the performer, the creative spirit who made everything feel magical. In high school, she'd created elaborate mix CDs with hand-drawn covers and glitter that ended up embedded in the carpet for months. She'd written lengthy, heartfelt cards for every occasion, her artistic handwriting flowing across handmade paper. Patricia and Richard had devoured every gesture, treasuring each creative expression like museum artifacts. Meanwhile, I had become the reliable one, the steady presence, the daughter who'd earned her CPA, then her financial planning certification, then her MBA through night classes while working full-time. I was the one who'd moved 2 hours away to build a career, who'd systematically paid down my student loans, and helped Patricia refinance their mortgage when Richard was too embarrassed to admit they were drowning financially. The family dynamic was crystal clear. They called Sophia when they wanted companionship, laughter, someone to visit and fill their house with creative energy. They called me when the water heater died, when the property taxes were due, when the car needed major repairs they couldn't afford. She gave them her time and artistic presence. I gave them financial stability. Guess which contribution earned better emotional lighting? It hadn't always been this unbalanced. Back when we were children, they used to say, "You girls are so wonderfully different, but both absolutely special in your own ways." That narrative shifted dramatically around the time I turned 24 and started earning enough to subsidize their lifestyle. By then, Sophia was cycling through careers more frequently than seasonal wardrobes. Acting classes, yoga instruction, jewelry making, freelance graphic design, none of which provided consistent income. She'd lived with them rent-free for nearly a decade after college, which they framed as finding her creative path. During that same period, I'd quietly paid their property taxes to prevent the house from going into foreclosure. You'd imagine that would have registered as significant, but apparently not. The thing is, I'd never demanded repayment or recognition. I hadn't expected them to compose songs about my contributions or create social media posts celebrating my financial support. But standing there at the reunion, watching Patricia praise Sophia like she'd single-handedly held the family together while I stood invisible just feet away, something fundamental cracked inside me. It was the way everyone nodded in agreement, the way no one looked confused or questioned the narrative. That's what destroyed me. Not a single person blinked because to them it made perfect sense. Of course Sophia was the daughter who'd always been there. Of course I was the one who'd never lifted a finger. The consensus was so complete, so unquestioned, that I realized I'd been erased long before Patricia's public announcement. So when I returned home that night, I opened my laptop and began systematically cancelling everything. Every automatic transfer, every standing payment order, every financial lifeline I'd quietly maintained for years. Mortgage support terminated. Grocery allowances ended. The gas card I'd been paying off monthly cancelled. The emergency account I'd established for their recurring furnace crises closed permanently. Even the dental bill that was due the following morning, I let it default. This wasn't rage or spite driving my decisions. It was clarity, pure and simple. If I was going to be invisible in their family story, I wasn't going to pay for the privilege of erasure anymore. I could have sent an explanatory message, laid out the full financial history, demanded acknowledgement, but they'd made their public choice. Now they could live with the private consequences of that choice. I didn't hear from them the following day. Not a single call, not one text message, which felt almost endearing because clearly someone had advised them to give Elena some space, as if I were a toddler having a meltdown over snack preferences. Not a 35-year-old financial professional who'd just been publicly humiliated in front of 52 people after funneling 15 years of economic support into a house I didn't even live in. But sure, give her space. That would definitely solve 15 years of systematic financial dependence. By Monday, they were back home. I only knew because Richard's Facebook location updated automatically. Wonderful weekend with family. We are truly blessed. No mention of me, naturally, and the radio silence continued. I found myself imagining them walking through their front door, maybe noticing that things felt slightly different in ways they couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps the cable service had been interrupted. Maybe there was a low battery warning flashing on the thermostat. Possibly the grocery delivery service they'd become accustomed to simply didn't arrive. Most significantly, the automatic bank transfer for their mortgage payment, which normally processed first thing Monday morning, hadn't materialized. I pictured Patricia staring at her phone bill notification, watching it bounce back for insufficient funds, then checking the gas bill, then the water, then the credit card that had been in my name for emergencies only, but somehow kept accumulating charges for concert tickets and weekend getaways. Not that I was actively monitoring the situation, but I did notice the email alerts accumulating in my inbox throughout the day. Payment failed. Transfer declined. Insufficient funds. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, quietly but inexorably. They must have attempted to access the joint account I'd allowed them to use for household expenses, because that afternoon the account showed 2 attempted logins from an unrecognized device. After the second failed attempt, the security system automatically locked the account. How unfortunate. Around 9:30 that evening, there was a knock at my penthouse door. I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I stood in my marble-floored hallway, back pressed against the wall, staring at the solid wood door as if it might reveal something profound. Then I heard Patricia's voice, smaller than usual, calling my name. Eleanor. I opened the door slowly. Patricia looked exhausted, her usual makeup absent, her hair dishevelled by the wind. She wore one of those thin cardigans she favoured when she wanted to appear fragile and sympathetic. Richard stood behind her, arms crossed defensively, not radiating anger exactly, just a weary resignation. "Can we come inside?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying a note of pleading I'd rarely heard before. "No," I said simply, "but we can talk here on the porch." She glanced around as if embarrassed to be conducting family business in such a public space. "We just wanted to clear the air about what happened," she began carefully. "I'm sure you do," I replied. "You mean the part where you stood up in front of 52 people and announced that I'd never lifted a finger? That wasn't meant the way it sounded." She was already backpedaling. I tilted my head slightly. "Actually, it sounded quite clear and intentional." "It was just a moment," she insisted. "Sophia had just given us that beautiful photo collage and everyone was watching. And she's been going through such a difficult time lately." "Sophia is always going through a difficult time. She's trying her best." Patricia's voice took on that familiar defensive tone she used whenever Sophia's lifestyle choices were questioned. "So you decided to publicly announce that she was the exemplary daughter, and I was." "What exactly? An afterthought?" "That's not a fair characterization." "No," I said, my voice hardening. "What's not fair is contributing over $183,000 toward your bills and living expenses over the past 15 years. And then being told publicly that I've never lifted a finger." Both of their faces went completely still. Richard blinked rapidly as if trying to process the number. I hadn't planned to quantify my support so precisely, but once the words were out, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if I'd finally set down something impossibly heavy. "That number is accurate, by the way," I continued. "I've kept meticulous records. Mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries, medical expenses, emergency repairs. The time I paid off Sophia's credit card debt because she claimed the stress was affecting her breathing. It all adds up to exactly $183,334. We never explicitly asked you to do any of that," Richard said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, you didn't," I agreed. "You just allowed me to, year after year, without acknowledgement or apparent awareness." Silence settled between us like fog. Patricia stared fixedly at the potted orchid beside my door. Richard looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Then Patricia said, "So this is really about money?" "No," I replied. "This is about you standing in front of everyone we know and rendering me invisible, then expecting me to continue acting as if I'm not. But we didn't think you'd take it so personally." I actually laughed. "Well, here we are." That's when Patricia shifted into her softer, more manipulative voice. The calculated tone change. "We just want to fix this situation," she said. "We love you, Elena." "Then perhaps you should have said that instead of rewriting the last 15 years of your financial survival with a speech and a photo frame." She nodded as if accepting responsibility, but then immediately added, "Sophia didn't mean to hurt your feelings." "Sophia wasn't the one who spoke those words. You were." More silence stretched between us. Eventually I said, "If you came here hoping I'd resume helping with the house payments, you're addressing the wrong daughter now." And I closed the door with quiet finality. 2 days later, Sophia appeared at my door. She rang the bell twice in quick succession, like someone late for an important appointment. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation or greeting. She simply walked past me as if we were still in 2012, and she was borrowing my designer shoes without asking permission. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to them?" she demanded, whirling around to face me. I closed the door calmly behind her. You'll need to be more specific about your concerns. They're in complete panic mode. They told me the mortgage payment is due in 3 days and they don't have nearly enough money. Her voice was rising toward hysteria. I raised an eyebrow. Interesting. They didn't warn you this might happen. What do you mean? I mean, after Patricia stood up in front of 52 people and announced that I'd never done anything meaningful for this family, did it occur to anyone to wonder what I might have been doing all these years? Sophia rolled her eyes dramatically. She got caught up in an emotional moment, then let that emotional moment cover the mortgage payment. You're being vindictive and spiteful. No, I corrected her. I'm being factual. You all declared publicly that I never help with anything. I'm simply adjusting my behavior to match your stated reality. But they literally don't have the money, Elena. You live with them rent-free. I sat down calmly on my leather sofa. You don't contribute to utilities, property taxes, insurance, or maintenance. But you do apparently have time to create elaborate photo collages and post inspirational quotes about self-care Sundays. That's not fair. Neither was Patricia's speech. Sophia looked like she wanted to scream, but she was intelligent enough to recognize it wouldn't help her cause. They're our parents, she said finally, playing what she clearly thought was her strongest card. You're just going to let them lose everything? No, I said. I'm going to let you step up to the plate. You're the daughter who's always loved them, remember? Patricia made that very clear. For the first time since she'd walked in, I saw Sophia falter. Just a flicker, a tiny muscle twitch at the corner of her mouth, a hairline crack in her confident facade. They need help, she said, but her voice had lost its demanding edge. Then get a job. A real one, with consistent hours and reliable paychecks. She turned and walked out without another word, leaving my door standing wide open behind her. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. Not because anything had been resolved, not because anyone had apologized or taken responsibility, but because for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't the one holding their entire financial structure together. And I genuinely wasn't lifting a finger. They went public with their version of events. It began with a Facebook post from Patricia naturally. A carefully curated group photo from the reunion, everyone smiling broadly, captioned, "Family means everything," even when some people choose to forget that. The comments section filled up immediately. She walked out just because your toast upset her? I mean, it wasn't even harsh. You were just stating facts. If someone gets offended by hearing the truth, maybe there's a deeper reason. Nobody used my name directly. They didn't need to. 52 people had witnessed Patricia's declaration. Most of them maintained active social media accounts. Everyone understood exactly who was being discussed. Distant cousins commented with crying face emojis and heart symbols. Someone posted a vaguely religious meme about the importance of forgiveness and family loyalty. But notably, no one asked what I'd actually been doing for the past decade and a half. No one questioned why the scenic boat tour, the lodge reservation, and the group dinner had all mysteriously evaporated when I left the reunion early. I wasn't tagged in any of these posts, but I saw everything. A mutual cousin sent me screenshots with nothing but a shrug emoji as commentary. For several days I said nothing. Let them craft whatever narrative made them comfortable. But then someone posted, she was always kind of emotionally distant, right? Never really engaged with family activities. And Patricia liked the comment. So I responded. One post, no sarcasm, no editorial commentary, just documentation. Screenshots of bank statements, email confirmations. Wire transfer receipts, mortgage payment records, texts confirming receipt of funds. The financial history laid out in chronological order, complete with dates and amounts. The final accounting spelled out at the bottom in case anyone's attention span flagged while scrolling over 15 years. $48,600 toward mortgage payments. $35,760 in utility bills. $21,240 in grocery allowances. $7,800 in medical costs and prescription copays. $6,850 when severe weather damaged their roof. $17,950 for Sophia's graduate school tuition. $1,800 for car repairs and maintenance, $23,000 for family vacations and celebrations, $2,300 for a cancelled trip deposit when Richard was hospitalized, plus dozens of smaller emergency transfers I'd stopped tracking individually. Total $183,330. I didn't tag anyone specifically. I simply posted the documentation publicly, set the privacy to maximum visibility. then closed the app and went to bed. By morning, Patricia's original post had been deleted. So had 3 other posts that had attempted to defend her position. The messages started arriving immediately. From my aunt, I had absolutely no idea you'd been doing all of this. You've always been so quiet about your contributions. From my cousin James, this is absolutely insane. If I were in your position, I'd never speak to them again. From Patricia herself, complete silence. But from Sophia, we need to talk immediately. The next time I saw Sophia, she looked like she'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she carried a reusable grocery bag that seemed to contain her entire weekly food budget. She'd lost weight, and not in a healthy, intentional way. When I opened the door, she didn't even attempt a greeting. "They made me get a job," she announced, as if reporting a human rights violation. "Welcome to the adult world. I'm serious, Elena." Her voice cracked with exhaustion. "So am I." She set the grocery bag on my granite counter. Through the thin fabric, I could see generic canned soup, instant ramen packages, off-brand paper towels, no fresh produce or protein sources. They told me I had to start contributing financially because you're gone. And you're apparently the one who made everything function smoothly all these years. Her voice broke completely on the last few words. They actually said that? I was genuinely surprised by their honesty. She blinked, suddenly realizing what she'd just admitted. I mean, not in those exact words, but they're struggling badly. They chose you at the reunion, Sophia, in front of everyone who matters to this family. You were publicly declared the daughter who'd always loved them. I was just trying to create a nice moment. I had no idea Patricia was going to say what she said. And you didn't correct her afterward. I was completely caught off guard. No, I said, looking directly into her eyes. You enjoyed hearing it. She didn't deny the accusation. They need help, she said instead. Then help them. I can't afford to cover everything they need. She gestured helplessly at her pathetic grocery bag. I studied her carefully. Really examined her appearance, the unwashed hair, the wrinkled clothes, the trembling in her thin arms. She wasn't sleeping properly. She wasn't eating enough. She was completely unraveling under the weight of adult responsibility. Try harder, I said, and closed the door firmly behind her. They appeared together this time, a delegation of defeat. Patricia, Richard, and Sophia stood at the bottom of my porch steps like children waiting outside the principal's office after a serious infraction. They didn't knock immediately, just huddled there until I noticed them through my window. I opened the door but remained on the threshold, making it clear they weren't being invited inside. "We're sorry," Patricia said, her voice smaller and older than I remembered ever hearing it. Richard stood silently behind her. Sophia looked utterly destroyed, not even pretending to smile. Her eyes had gone completely hollow. Not angry or defiant, just empty with exhaustion. "We shouldn't have said what we said at the reunion," Patricia continued. "It was thoughtless and stupid. We weren't thinking clearly." "No," I corrected her. "You were thinking. You just didn't believe there would be any consequences." Patricia looked down at her shoes. "It was just a moment of poor judgment. You know how Patricia gets when she's emotional," Sophia added weakly. And I enjoyed hearing the praise. "That's my fault," she admitted. "I understand, but we didn't really mean any of it," Patricia said. "Not deep down." I nodded slowly. "Unfortunately, it doesn't matter what you meant. You made a public choice. You have to understand our perspective." "No," I said firmly. "You need to understand mine. You told 52 people that I'd never lifted a finger for this family while I was actively paying your mortgage, your utility bills, while my name was on your insurance policies, your credit accounts, your everything. I invested 183,330s over 15 years to be systematically erased from your family narrative." None of them responded. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. "And now," I continued, "you get to live with the consequences of that choice." Patricia swallowed hard. Richard looked away toward the street. Sophia stared at her worn sneakers. I waited for arguments, tearful pleas, dramatic emotional manipulation. But there was nothing. Just 3 people who had finally grasped the magnitude of what they'd lost. "I'm not angry anymore," I said quietly. "I'm simply finished." And I closed the door. A few months later, I learned that Sophia had moved out. She'd lasted longer than I'd predicted. But eventually, the financial pressure became unbearable. The bills, the constant errands, the late-night emergency calls when something broke, it all caught up with her systems. She found a small apartment farther from the city and didn't leave a forwarding address with the family. Not long after Sophia's departure, Patricia and Richard sold the house. The same house I'd helped them maintain for 15 years. The house they'd claimed I'd never lifted a finger to save. They accepted the first offer they received and completed the sale rapidly. Now they live in a rental property with paper-thin walls and unreliable electrical systems. I know this because my cousin drove past their new address and reported back. I never went to see it myself. Not because I harbor anger, but because I'm genuinely done with that chapter of my life. Some people believe family bonds are eternal and unconditional. Others learn through painful experience that family relationships, like all relationships, are fundamentally conditional and can be broken by choices and consequences. Did I go too far in my response or not far enough? I suppose that depends entirely on your perspective.